Where does the music come from? Who are the composers? They're Italians and Germans and Russians.
What are the most popular forms of music that America is known to export to the world?
Yes, and that's not culture.
That's rock and roll, hip hop, rap. Where do these come from primarily? So this is a
That's
total.
not-
This is a
That
loser
is not
topic. You
high-
have
that
to
is
go
not
to
high culture.
You
That's
have
not high
to go to
culture.
another subject besides music because it is the worst example you could have picked. Like jazz is one of the most important contributions that America's made on the world stage. To
Jazz
music.
is a bastardization of the waltz. That's what jazz music.
Wait, would you say that every single form of art is a bastardization of the art that it was derived from? You realize that every single, like, would you say that Romanticism was a bastardization of classical music, or the most important musical contributions that America has made to the world, like the origins of like rock and roll and rap and blues? Like a lot of these things were inspired by African Americans, which are not European. This is literally some of America's most important contributions to the world musically.
Is jazz a derivative, a lower derivative of the waltz?
What do you mean
Because
a lower
if you
derivative?
It's a simplification and a Judaized version of the waltz.
No,
It's the
there's
waltz
nothing
without the order.
What waltzes are incredibly simplistic, harmonically speaking, compared to the rich textures that you can find in jazz. I mean, like, what are you talking about?
Come on.
Come on. No, hold on. I'm going to be fair to you. I think we
There's
should
no
move-
order. There's no order to jazz music.
What do you mean
There's
by
no
order? Define order.
It does. It's made up on the go.
No, it's not.
Jazz music is made up on the go. That's
No,
why it
it's
sounds
not.
so
What are you
stupid.
talking about? A lot of the repeated passages that you hear in classical music, in the past, piano players would have actually been expected to improvise new passages there. But it doesn't happen anymore because classical music is seen as more of a museum than an actual modern day like evolution of music. So if you want to say that improvisation means that there's no order to it, that doesn't even work for you.
What are the foundations of American culture?
Okay, that I'm just saying because I don't know what your health insurance is like. We don't have Medicare for all here. That pivot was actually so extreme. I'm worried you're going to injure yourself. So slow down. Okay. The reason is because rich middle class assholes like to virtue signal to other rich middle class assholes that they're cultured because people like you think that listening to music that was written over 200 years ago somehow makes you a more informed consumer of music, which it doesn't.
The elites have decided to turn the people of America into culturally bankrupt people because people with no culture are people who are susceptible to become slaves.
I just want to point out that the ultimate irony of this entire last section about how elites are dictating what we want to listen to on the radio, when you're citing classical composers that literally these operas that you're talking about were commissioned by literal elites, literal royalty and noblemen for them to be written and played. And you're talking like if anybody here is pushing a message from the elites, it would be somebody telling us to listen to an opera that a fucking king or baron like literally commissioned from somebody to write for them.
What I meant by elites is that the elites are the ones that control the radio stations and they decide what the people hear.
Okay, I will agree with that, and I will concede that in the 1800s, the elites had less control of the radio stations. I will concede to that.
Oh, good one.
All right, go ahead, Destiny. Now it's your turn to.
You're talking about a $1.5 trillion no interest. Are you talking about the recent repo market thing? So the recent $1.5 trillion thing, that wasn't funny money or random whatever loan. That was the Treasury providing cash, liquid cash to financial institutions in exchange for Treasury notes. Like they're not just giving them money; they're exchanging like cash,
them stock with money.
Yeah, but they're trading it. It's a secured, it's collateralized debt. It's a secured debt. That's not just nothing, right? So that would be like the federal government giving me $100 and then me giving them back like a Treasury note for $100, and then like
it's at 0% interest.
It's a secured debt. Every debt, even consumer debt, is very, very low interest if it's secured. That's why our car loans.
But it's higher than 0%.
It can be, sure. I mean, you can
It is.
Well, you can get a 0% interest car loan.
In the web of semantics and oftentimes bullshit.
No. It's not just semantics. No. It's not just. You can't just hand wave every explanation as semantics because it doesn't fit your weird conspiracy that Jews are running the fucking world.
I didn't say that alone. You said
literally, and in a conversation about finance, you decided to bring up who owns Goldman Sachs when it's not relevant to the operation of the financial system. You're trying to pivot so hard because you want to talk about Jews that you won't even sit here and think for 2 seconds of your understanding of the financial system works, the way that how it works.
Why is it that the Federal Reserve can provide cash liquidity at 0% interest to Goldman Sachs, but can't provide it to ordinary people?
Because
Why
ordinary
is it?
people do not have the collateral to back up that debt and cannot pay back those massive sums of money in as short a time period as massive financial institutions like Goldman Sachs can. A person can't hand over their car, like get a car and then pay back that loan in 3 months. If you look at this $1.5 trillion repo thing that you just recently brought up, the timelines on these loans are incredibly fucking short. It's done for liquidity, not so that they can just take it and invest in banks. They have to pay these back, these massive $1 trillion or more for individual institutions, hundreds of billions or tens of billions. They have to pay back these loans in a matter of months. A human that buys something, a normal consumer that buys something on a credit card at 24% interest is doing so because if they default on that debt, then you're shit out of luck. I can't go to a person that owes me $10,000 in credit card debt and what, go into their house and steal their My Little Pony collection or like a computer desk or a monitor they bought. Like, no, that debt is unsecure. Okay, you've got two separate questions that you're confusing with the other. So one is, should massive financial institutions that are the backbone of our economy be allowed to partake in speculative markets that might be damaging to the overall economy? This is an amazing question, and in my opinion, the answer is probably not. It seems really fucking unhealthy. Then the second question you're asking is why do large businesses need a cash injection from the government to ensure liquidity in times of crisis?
To, like you said, stock buybacks. That's the big one in the
Which
last
is
couple of
good,
years.
yeah.
It's great. Look at the stock market and look at Boeing shaking their coffee cup outside the government.
What does the current pandemic have to do
great
with?
idea.
Wait. What does the current pandemic have to do with stock buybacks?
How about the diving stock market?
So that was because of stock buyback? I thought that stock buybacks were supposed to artificially inflate stock value. Why are they going down?
Dude, why are you being facetious?
I'm not being facetious. You just have no idea how finance works. You thought you could have this conversation. It's hilarious.
Have been using their debt-powered machinery, their debt-powered finances, unbalanced books, to buy their own stock so that it's more it's of higher value on the stock market. Artificially, it bubbles up.
How is that artificial?
Because if you're buying your own stock and you're engaging in that kind of speculative activity, you're not doing anything productive.
How is that? That's literally
you're
the
not
opposite of
building
speculative.
anything.
Wait. That's because there are no good investments to make. That's pretty common of large companies. So let me back all the way up. So when you say, why do major institutions need financial injections or cash injections or liquidity injections from the Fed or whatever in order to stay afloat? The reason is because we want to keep our economy moving. We don't want every single business hoarding money or not loaning money or sitting on piles of money in anticipation of a massive worldwide pandemic. That would be catastrophic to the entire economy. That's why if a worldwide pandemic does happen, we look to the federal government to say, hey, can you give our businesses a little bit of a hand to keep them afloat? This is like one of the most no-brainer policy decisions in the world. This is literally a win-win-win-win policy decision. If the government gives a cash injection to these companies, it helps the companies not go underwater. It helps the workers not get fired or laid off. It helps the federal government or the taxpayer because those loans are often paid back with interest. And it helps consumers that can continue to buy products for cheaper costs than they would if all of these companies were to go under and the cost of goods either increases or these goods disappear completely. Okay, also, this idea that stock buybacks are some parasitic activity, when by definition a stock buyback is returning money to the shareholders that invested in your company, is literally the exact opposite of a parasitic activity. A parasitic activity would be a company making a lot of money and sitting on that money, and it can't do anything else with it in the economy, being a parasite with that money that's just sitting there. A better idea would probably be to buy back stocks, return money to shareholders, and let those shareholders take those dollars and invest them in other companies that can invest those in profitable projects. Now, if you want to talk about something like, well, when Trump gave those big tax cuts, the only thing companies did with it was do buybacks instead of investing in their companies, I agree. Those tax cuts were fucking stupid. But that's a criticism of the tax cuts themselves, not stock buybacks in general.
So this is a fundamental difference in our values, Destiny. You believe this. I'm a proponent of total immigration restriction to all Western countries from the series of opinions you have that you're for mass immigration. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I'm for immigration as long as it makes economic sense, I guess. As long as within reasonable restrictions. I'm not gonna have any race quotas or whatever. If I don't know where you're going with it, but
there is no economic sense to immigration. There's no need for immigration in the United States right now.
That's our unemployment is literally at 3 point. Our unemployment is literally the lowest it's ever been in the history of the United States. It's at 3.5%. Like businesses are hiring at like.
Believe that number? You believe that number? You think only 3% of people in this country are out of work? You really think that?
That's not what the U3 unemployment stands for. I'm sorry. You're going to cite the U6 like I've never heard of it before? We can pretend that like there's a
then
meaningful...
why do you use that? Why do you use the fake statistic rather than the real?
Well, because that's a really good question, Yeah. And if we were to wander in, Well,
Yeah,
no, that's a
exactly.
really great
You're being
question. No,
disingenuous.
I'm not being disingenuous. It's a very difficult question for economists to ask. There's a lot of different ways to keep track of unemployment. For instance, do we count young people that are under the age of 18 but could still technically work but would have to do it at restricted hours? Do we count older people that have willingly left the workforce? Do we count people that are collecting Social Security but are still working? It's a really hard. Do we count people that are not really looking for work? Do we count people that are discouraged from looking for work? That's a really complicated question. It's funny that you're going to sit here and pretend like it's got such an obvious answer when it's one of the most hotly debated things in economics, and it's one of the reasons why the federal government keeps like 7 different numbers on unemployment.
My point is that
your point was incorrect. It's not simple. But the U3 unemployment, which is widely regarded as one of the better metrics for how we should figure unemployment, is 3.5%. It's lower than it ever has been in the history of all of unemployment. And the U6 unemployment, which is maybe another one that you want to use, which includes discouraged workers, is 7%, which is also lower than what we would consider most frictional employment.
There's also an undercount. Because it's not counting people that are going on disability, people
it does. That's literally why these other forms of unemployment tracking exist.
Furthermore, why isn't the unemployment rate 0? And if the unemployment rate's not 0, why do we need more immigration?
So the unemployment rate isn't 0 because some level of frictional unemployment is considered necessary for an economy to function. You want businesses to be able to hire people, and you want people to be able to apply to businesses for jobs. Economists consider ideal unemployment to be about 5.5%, anywhere from 5 to 6%, depending on which.
Is that ideal for the people out of work?
That's ideal for the people and the businesses. Yeah, the people in businesses.
Yeah, and I don't care if a business needs 100 million Mexicans to fucking work for cheap. I don't care about that.
Well, but you do care if poor people can't afford to buy all their food from Trader Joe's or from some $17 for a gallon of milk store. Lower cost of goods is actually important to a lot of people that can't afford to buy, the most expensive shit they can in the United States.
Agricultural labor in this country is some of the most exploited of all the sectors, and it's because the people doing it are illegal immigrants from Mexico that don't have any rights, and also they work for very cheap. So
okay, I agree with you on that point. I'll concede we should have amnesty for all the illegals. Okay,
yeah, that's exactly what I said.
Gotcha. I agree with that.
Legal aliens, not always, but many times, are single men who live. For example, in the agricultural industry, they live in these kind of barracks that these companies, agribusiness, puts up for them.
Okay.
They live together. They have a much lower standard of living because they're saving up dollars to send back to their country. Again, that's money that our economy loses, by the way. Many
we
billions.
don't lose that money. It comes back to the United States. This also has to do with finance, but I can explain that later if you want. So when we buy products or when we ship USD to other countries, that USD has to make its way back to the United States in the forms of purchasing goods or services or in the forms of capital investment. So for instance, we talk about the trade deficit with China, or we talk about
repatriation.
Yes, the money that you send overseas. When that USD exists in other countries, especially because it's like a Federal Reserve or the global reserve currency, that USD generally makes its way back to the United States in the forms of purchasing goods and services. Any other economy that's holding a lot of USD, because of the way that governments work, can't pay taxes in that currency, so it has to bring that USD back to the US to invest or buy things. So for instance, our giant trade deficit with China, oftentimes when we buy things from China, that money makes its way back to the US in the form of investments or in the form of purchase of goods and services.
Who gets those profits, though? Well, hold
on. So I understand that you just got an answer that you totally weren't ready for. Now we can run down to try to find where the Jews get paid off the end of this. However, I don't need to answer your extended trying to figure out how you could possibly be right here. I'm just telling you that when USD goes overseas or goes to other countries, that isn't lost. It doesn't hurt our economy. That's just not true. Now, if you want to talk about what's an appropriate way to distribute income in the United States to different classes of people, I'm all for that. I love redistribution.
All economic activity lost to the average workers in the United States.
Where does that USD go in Mexico? What do they do with it? Do they just bury it in a hole?
It gets translated into the national currency usually.
How do they translate it? That's not how it works. There's not a magic money. There's not like a magic money photocopier where you take your USD into a Mexican bank and you just magically turn that into a peso. That USD has to make its way back to the US in the form of the purchasing of a good or service. You're not taking into account the other types of economic activity that can bolster native wages as well. For instance, more labor being available in a given area might allow you to open up other businesses. In those businesses that open up, complementary positions for management or supervisors will open that generally natives are more qualified for than immigrants. This is why when people have studied massive immigrations to different areas and they've tried to find all these horrible impacts on native wages, it's generally not found. There is a certain subclass of people, generally people without a high school education, that'll take a 2 to 4% loss in income over a long term.
Let me refer you to the number one guy who studied the economic impact of immigration on wages. This guy is George Borhaus.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Borhaus' research and his responses to David Card on his big Muriel Boatlift study. And Borhaus himself will tell you that it's about 2 to 4% earnings in just high school graduates with no college education. That's it.
Not $500 billion have been redistributed away from natives into profits for capitalists.
It's really interesting.
And
No, wait, real quick. Wait, no, hold on, just so I can respond to that. Because I know exactly what you're talking about. So that $500 billion, what he said is there's probably been a negative fiscal impact of immigrants by about $500 billion, but there's probably been a positive economic impact of about $500 billion. He said that at the end of the day, what we need is a better tax policy that can allocate money away from the winners of that immigration policy back towards natives. That's his contention. He's not saying that we need no immigration. He's just saying that a form of wealth transfer.
I'm not saying what his opinions. I'm talking about this one study, this one statistic. So
because I'm just gonna read the article because I'm very familiar with this Borhaus article where he talks about this 500 billion figure. So I'm literally quoting Borhaus himself, which is the guy that you decided to cite, by the way. But we're worrying about the wrong things, with policy fights focused on how many and which immigrants to accept, and not enough on how to mitigate the harm that they create along the way. To use a label recently coined by Larry Summers, a quote-unquote responsible nationalist, policy cannot ignore the reality that immigration has made some natives poorer. A policy that keeps them in mind might tax the agricultural and service companies that benefit so much from low-skilled immigrants and use the money to compensate low-skilled Americans for their losses and to help them transition to new jobs and occupations. Similarly, Bill Gates claims that Microsoft creates 4 new jobs for every H-1B visa granted. If true, firms like Microsoft should be willing to pay many thousands of dollars for each of these coveted visas. Those funds could be used to compensate and retrain the affected natives in the high-tech industry. If you're going to cite somebody like Borhaus, know that Borhaus' prescriptions for these problems is with tax policy. It's not just closing the border. It's not just closing the borders.
So he's diagnosing the problem. He has a different solution than me. I agree with you. Okay.
Why would you say? Why would you give a diagnosis?
I'm not a George Borhaus.
Why would you take the diagnosis of somebody that has so much more training and background in this and then give your own prescription? That's like saying I went to the doctor and they diagnosed me with cancer, but I ignored his chemo suggestions. I'm going to go do homeopathy or some shit.
That if a bunch of Zionist Jews give the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign $1 billion in 2016, that this will have no impact on their view of Israel.
I don't think that Jewish citizens or Israeli people or whatever donating money to American campaigns that are running for president, I don't think are having these massive changes in foreign policy that's running contrary to American opinion on Israel. No, of course not. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. Israel is massively unpopular with both the Democratic and the Republican Party, the voters themselves, not just policymakers.
Remember, the Democrats vote as a bloc for Israel, right? They greenlight it. So it's a bipartisan. 27% support Israel amongst Democratic voters. So that means that the majority do not.
Okay, so hold on. So wait. So the poll said wait. So what you just said So what you just said was a lie. So Democrats are divided on the Mideast situation as 27% say their sympathies lie more with the Israelis and 26% say their sympathies lie more with the Palestinians, with 46% undecided. So what you just said was a lie. It's not that the majority of them are against it, it's that most are a plurality is undecided. This is why I can't trust anything you bring up. This is why I'm asking you for sources, because you're misciting almost everything you bring up.
Let's meet halfway then.
No. Hold on. I'm not meeting you halfway. What you just said was a bold-faced fucking lie because you hoped I wouldn't look up your poll. Also, this is over one very specific instance, not like the support for Israel in general. And with 46%,
I can find you other statistics.
Maybe you should have found those. Hey, maybe you should have found those. Maybe you should have found those for this conversation.
Let's get back to the bigger point.
Maybe you should have found those for this conversation and not thrown me one that you misquoted. I threw like two. Here's a Gallup poll. Here's a polling report. This idea that Americans don't support Israel is fucking hilariously uninformed. You being a fucking Nazi, you should know this, right? What I'm saying is that
you want to live your life playing video games.
Holy
for money.
shit! Well, right now I'm living my life shitting on some dumb fuck Nazi that wanted to open up a conversation about music
and your platform. So, give me a break, man.
What is the break, dude? You on almost every single source you've given me tonight, you've either been wrong, unfamiliar with the source, or you've misquoted. Like, holy shit, dude. Like, the image of fucking albums and stuff. 4chan people argue this shit better than you. Like, you're an embarrassment to fucking Nazis. Do you realize that? Do you realize how low the bar is? I could probably find a random dude. I bet you if I were to go and check the fucking poll threads right now, there are people on there saying Stryker sucks dick at arguing for third positionism. That fucking Enoch was giving better arguments than fucking Stryker could. That he's literally falling apart right now to a guy that sucks dick that plays video games professionally. I thought this was going to be fucking hard, dude.
Wait a minute.
I thought this was going to be difficult. Holy shit.
It's not to say every single Jew all over the place is involved in a conspiracy.
Only the ones selectively that fit your conspiracy the best. I know, bro. I just said that there are major issues that are unresolved with respect to the Holocaust. That is just not true. Now, if we want to say that there are things that historians could quibble about, not only are there things that they can quibble about, they do to this day. Those debates are not related over whether 6 million Jews were killed or 150,000 Jews were killed. No serious historian has ever made or defended any of those extreme claims made by revisionists. All of this work in revisionist history relies on citing these documents that they hope people never check out. Half the time, these footnotes lead to nowhere, or they're just footnote citing like an entire fucking book or something, and then most of the time the translations are either wrong or taken out of context. So no, the idea that the judge said that there were unresolved issues, that is a mischaracterization of what the judge said, which is why Irving lost that trial. But I know that people have constantly tried to attack the millions of Jews that were killed in these places, and it's just laughable. Like, we have records and archives of these people. These were not like fucking countries from like fucking 12,000 BC where we have no records of any of these people. The idea that like magically 5 million
record
people...
of Hitler giving any orders for it.
So, because it was a very clear policy that they had to not give those specific orders, but commanders that met with Hitler...
Who's a conspiracy theorist now? Who's a conspiracy theorist now?
Probably the guy that's not denying that a country that had a very racialized policy that literally invaded other countries like Austria-Hungary and literally told them to kill all of their fucking Jews. What, do you think that this was happening and Hitler had no fucking idea? Like, how naive do you think he was? Like, all of these people that were close to Hitler, like, very clearly were relaying orders that they were given from him directly.
Yeah, then there's no you say, oh, we have all the documents, and there's not a single fucking document to say that Hitler gave any orders like that, even though they have documents. The Nazi archives, if you're familiar with them, are extremely meticulous. Germans are very meticulous
Enough to also to not leave a literal written order. It's just not true. Everything you're saying is just completely not true.
Okay.
Hitler, by definition, Nazis did not give explicit commands saying murder the Jews.
The David Irving being an unreliable historian only happened after he wrote his book. David Irving poured through the archives while writing the book and said, I found no archive proof that there was a plan.
Gotcha. So every single time in this trial, when Irving was forced to defend some contention that he made in his book, he had to walk back from it every single time. When he brought up the idea that nobody was actually driven out in a van and gassed, when Evans pushed him on it, every single time he was pushed on one of these issues, he had to walk back from it and concede that he was absolutely full of shit. When you try to bring up these little weird facts about the blueprints not fitting, about the idea that the holes couldn't actually fit enough people in it, all of this was bullshit napkin math that not only had Evans done, he walked back from when he was pushed consistently. And in terms of what the judge found, the judge literally said that Irving had his own ideological reasons for persistently and deliberately misrepresenting and manipulating historical evidence related to Hitler.
Even if I convince you fully, Destiny, that what I'm saying is true, you're still not going to admit it because you're a fucking coward and you make a living from lying to people about neoliberalism and all these crap.
I think the funny thing is that, like, if anybody is the coward, it's actually you. Like, you're too scared to take a hard look in the mirror to figure out what we need to do to fix society, and instead it's easier to just blame the Jewish fucking boogeyman, dude. Every one of you conspiracy theorists is the same way. You're too lazy to do any of the actual hard work into figuring out how can we make a better society, how can I improve my life. Instead, you just want to find one fucking boogeyman to blame everything on because you're too much of a fucking coward to look in the mirror and figure out what you can do to fix yourself. Like, exactly. Like, this is 100% what it is. Like, this idea that a bunch of fucking white people will get together and make everything better is like laughably fucking naive, dude.
Zyklon B was used in the 1920s to delouse Mexicans on the U.S. border when they came to work on farms.
Okay, and bleach is used.
6 million Mexicans died.
And bleach is used to clean floors. You don't think you can commit suicide with bleach? What a stupid fucking point. Are you just thinking at this point?
That's not the same thing at all. Because he. All right.
Well, no, you're right. It's not the same thing. Just because I can use certain chemicals to do a certain purpose doesn't. I'm sure you're fucking tired. This is taking 120% of that fucking brain of yours to make up this crazy fucking bullshit. Holy fuck. You know what? I will concede one point to you, okay? All of you fucking white nationalists always say some shit about how, like, even if white people don't have a higher IQ than Asians, we have a higher creative IQ. And after listening to the crazy fucking tales and lies that you spun in this debate, I'm starting to fucking believe it. Because holy shit, you are making up some crazy fucking stories, my dude. He doesn't know how art or culture works, which is surprising and funny. He doesn't know basic, like, finance. He doesn't know basic economics. He doesn't know how campaign finance works. He's literally illiterate in almost all of these areas, yet is so fucking smart that he can point out these grand conspiracies that exist in all of these different places. I submit to you that there there are a lot of problems that exist in America today, but these problems can be fixed largely within the system. That we can do things like more tax redistribution, that we can have programs like Medicare for All, that we can look at things like the negative impact of technology in our lives without feeling like we have to kick out all the fucking brown people or black people, or like we have to blame the fucking Jews on some weird grand conspiracies that people have claimed for fucking millennia have existed that never pan out to seemingly actually exist. Like this idea that all of us should band together as white people when we don't even identify that way, which in and of itself is laughable because we don't. And if you go to fucking Europe, that you fetishize so much, you find that people there don't do it as well. You've got Swedes, you've got fucking Germans, you've got British people. They don't all see themselves as some collective white people. That's a uniquely American concept, which if anything demonstrates the idea that whiteness or any of these racial groups are as fluid as you fucking want them to be. If we all became a white people today, then tomorrow we'd become blue-eyed and brown-eyed people. If we killed all the brown-eyed people, the next day we'd become blondes and fucking brunettes. I think we should focus on the real problems that exist in America today, the alienation we have from our work, the alienation that's caused by technology, and the alienation that might be caused by our horrible fucking economic policies, and focus on that rather than spreading all these baseless bullshit conspiracy theories that have zero fucking foundation in reality because we're too scared to take a look at the actual problems that impact us.